Welcome back to Otaku Daikun. Dai here. Today we'll be finishing off CL's normal ending in the Tsukihime Remake, covering all the goods so that English speakers aren't left out of this beautiful novel. Last we left off, Shiki's been fighting against the dead apostle Roa, who's begun taking over his mind. Noelle, the sadistic executor from the church, has allowed herself in a state of weakness to be manipulated by Dr. Araku and turned into a dead apostle through idea blood injections. Shiki wakes up from a morbid nightmare. He's not sure how long he slept, but he wants to make up for his behavior by taking responsibility for breaking the chair. Despite his earlier outburst, Hisui greets him calmly as she always does. Kohaku cleaned up the mess with the broken chair, so Akiha won't even know about it. Hisui then asks if Shiki realizes what day it is. He checks the calendar and confirms it's Monday, so he needs to prepare for school. When he goes to get changed, he spots his knife, and he recalls that with Roa dead, CL should be leaving since her mission is complete. For once, he leaves his knife behind and heads to class. On the way, his expectations are subverted yet again, because CL still hasn't left. She explains she doesn't have a new assignment, and will be sticking around till her graduation. After all, she can't go leaving Shiki behind. With much rejoicing, the two split up to get to class on time. Too impatient to wait for lunch break, though, Shiki goes to see CL in the shorter break between classes. They run into each other in the hallway, and he remarks he's glad that she actually takes her classes seriously. Part of him imagined she could have just spent her time in the tea ceremony room all day, using her suggestion magecraft to skip lessons. The mere suggestion has her giving off a devilish smile. Nevertheless, she does admit that she misses out on class sometimes, in order to deal with her real job of vampire hunting. That said, her suggestion spells aren't as convenient as he imagines. Rather than forcing people to think a certain way, her spells divert their attention from inconvenient truths. It's less that she forced her way into the minds of her classmates, and more that she just had them ignore that she's a stranger. Suggestions have to be worded very carefully to get their desired effect. The idea that she's such a reliable senpai was more of their natural reaction to her than a wild narrative she spun for her own ego. Anyway, even if the vampire should be gone now, CL still wants to be able to contact Shiki if their situation changes. As such, the two exchange email and phone numbers. When lunch break actually comes around, the students are informed that, because of the damaged sewer system, school will be closing early. Arihiko wants to use this chance to hang out. Shiki refuses, claiming he already has plans with CL, and is surprised to learn that, once again, Arihiko actually knows who she is. Dude's been brainwashed back and forth during this whole route. Anyway, CL shows up and asks if Shiki will be visiting the tea room again. Being left out of the conversation, Arihiko shakes Shiki and barges into their plans, suggesting they should go enjoy the city. To ease the tension, CL adds the three of them should go out to eat somewhere. After some debate, they decide on visiting Aninerba, a recurring location in the Nasuverse. She demands they meet there in 30 minutes, leaving Shiki almost no time to run home and change clothes. Even after setting a new record, it still takes him 20 minutes to reach the mansion from school. Back home, he excitedly rushes past Isui and up the stairs, but his happiness is immediately struck down by a sudden headache. His vision goes red, and he falls back down the staircase. Isui calls out to him in concern, but thankfully Kohaku is used to treating illnesses. He's only got a bit of bruising, so the bigger issue is his obvious fever. Kohaku recommends he stay home and rest, but he doesn't want to miss out on the fun. Even so, she cannot in good faith let someone in his condition be so reckless. Considering he still feels like shit, he realizes he can hang out with his friends some other time, and agrees to rest. Unable to walk on his own though, Kohaku asks Hisui to escort him to his room. It's not fully established yet, but Hisui is afraid of touching men. But after her sister scolds her for ignoring a patient in need, she lends him a hand. While Kohaku goes to grab the right medicine, Hisui uncomfortably walks Shiki upstairs. We've been seeing Araku for our medical needs thus far, but Kohaku learned about medicine from treating Makihisa. In that respect, Shiki's in good care. Even so, his splitting headache only gets worse, like a sharp knife jabbing into his skull. With anger setting in, he tells Hisui that she's an eyesore and needs to leave him alone. Clearly hurt by his words, she woefully but professionally complies. His headache subsides enough for him to go rest until it gets dark out. Around dinner, Akiha gets home and pays him a visit. Even as his voice is dry and hoarse, Shiki tries to temper Akiha's worry. Without an appetite, he turns down dinner, preferring to stay in bed. Left alone, he expresses frustration with everyone treating him like he's frail. Despite being incredibly thirsty, he decides to snuff out his agony with sleep. This works for a few hours, until he wakes up suffocating. Compelled by his thirst, he steps out of bed, and while making an effort to drink some water in the dining room, his body gets dressed, fetches his knife, and heads out into the dark city. Luckily, everyone in the mansion had already retired for the night. Looking for prey, he finds a girl on the streets that reminds him of Akiha. Dragging her by the hair, he heads to an abandoned alleyway. In his mind, he's merely crossing the lobby to the dining room. The girl is still alive, since he'd rather not devour cold blood. When ready to dig in, he holds up his knife and… Huh? He's still in his bed? Was that all just a dream? His pounding chest hurts too much for him to sleep. Instead, he decides to read another book. The more he contemplates, though, the more he starts to realize that he's still standing in the alleyway, knife in hand, with the kidnapped girl collapsed beside him. For every time he tries to deny it as a dream, his mind yearns to see the color of her blood after slicing up her limbs. The urge to hold himself back is bothersome, and he envies how free-spirited Vlav was. If it turns out these dreams of his are real, then what exactly happened during his previous nightmare? Furthermore, he realizes he can't remember anything that happened on Sunday. It's as if the entire day was skipped, and he suspects this might actually be because of Roa, like Noelle had assumed. His captive begins to wake up, and he's assailed by the urge to kill her and eliminate the evidence. She notices the knife held to her neck, and just as she begins to scream, Shiki beats her to the punch. Shouting like a madman, he runs away. Laughing maniacally, he sprints back to the mansion, horrified by his own actions. He tries to escape from himself by locking himself in his room. He struggles to turn the actual lock, as one hand is stuck gripping and twisting the door handle. Similarly, his other hand won't release the knife. At first, he uses the knife to slice at his own hand, hoping to free it. When that fails, he grips the knife in his other hand, letting it dig into his palm so he can use his fingers to turn the lock. Finally, he hears a click and feels relief. Even so, he keenly admits that it's over for him. Shiki spends the rest of the night awake and in agony. The hand he slashed at, while previously mangled, has healed itself. He's misplaced his glasses, and seeing the lines makes him nauseous. Cutting things seems to help a bit, so he tears his room apart. Everything he looks at pisses him off, yet when he closes his eyes, he remembers the girl in the alley and his urge to kill. At the worst possible time, Hisui stops by to bring him a change of clothes. She asks him to unlock the door when he's fully awake, but he won't do that. He obviously can't control himself. Instead, he shouts at her to leave him alone. Seeking distraction, Shiki looks for books to read, only to discover that there never were any books in his room. He fears Noelle was right, that what he thought was reading was actually Roa bleeding into his mind. He wonders just how long he's even been himself, and if there's any of himself even left. The internal turmoil has him destroying more of the room, prompting a horrified Hisui to call him from the other side of the door. Now, Shiki can no longer formulate words, instead screaming like a banshee. To erase the thought of harming her from his mind, he slams his head repeatedly into the wall till his skull nearly cracks. The way he shut himself in reminds him of exactly what the French girl from his memories went through moments before losing to Roa's will. Of course, he doesn't realize that girl was Ciel. The only thing stopping him from plunging into the deep end is the simple door separating them. He can't even kill himself to stop Roa, as he thinks that would only hasten the awakening. Thankfully, Hisui gave up and left him in solitude for a few hours. For this time, he's able to contain himself, resting against the wall and hugging his rattling body. As the hours pass, he drowns out the voices that come to check in on him. Sometimes 10 minutes pass by in a second, while other times a single second feels like minutes. Regardless, he holds back his thirst for blood until the sun sets. His peace is disrupted at 8 o'clock when Kohaku comes to bring him dinner. Undeterred by the locked door, she simply takes out her master key and lets herself in. Let's just say this is game over if you gave in to your rage back with Noelle in the warehouse. That ending is especially creepy. In our case, the moment Kohaku enters the room, Shiki is assailed by an urge to slaughter, but he just barely keeps it in check. Despite seeing the state of his room, she's surprisingly calm. He listens to her muffled voice lecturing him, but his mind only fixates on her white complexion. Ignoring his obvious discomfort, Kohaku steps even closer, unafraid as though she were used to this behavior. Not wanting to betray that trust, he tries to tell her to escape, but the words don't come out. The final straw is the moment she touches so much as a finger to his shoulder. While doing his best to suppress himself, his body reacts on its own, tackling Kohaku to the ground and pinning her. Straining to the point of a nosebleed and biting into his own tongue, he watches as his left hand clasps down and starts to strangle her. Horrified, he channels his violent energy into his right hand and starts to stab the left with his knife. This brings him to his senses enough to glimpse his glasses. His maniacal laughter signals relief as he puts them on and gains some more clarity. He continues laughing, but deep down he knows he needs to leave or he'll hurt Kohaku more. With nowhere to go, he runs out of the mansion like a lunatic. Desperate to avoid other people, he finds momentary solace at the park. Even so, he can still hear the city's hustle and bustle, irritating him. With civilization close by, he has ready access to prey, and his lack of sleep is catching up to him. If his consciousness wanes, Roa will take over, so to keep himself awake, he cuts himself with a knife. Yearning for salvation, he thinks of Ciel, the only person he feels he can turn to. Good thing he's got her number. She picks up the phone after 3 rings, but considers it an accident when Shiki doesn't say anything on his end. After some time, her warm voice prompts him to speak. He imagines telling a lie, or even hanging up, but luckily he comes clean and admits that Noelle was right about him. He's succumbing to his lust for blood and has no idea what to do. Calmly, Ciel asks for his location. The park is still part of a residential area, so she asks him to meet up at the ruins where they fought Vlav. It should still be abandoned, especially at night. Fortunately, Shiki gets there without running into anyone else. To get inside, he takes off his glasses and slices the chain between 2 barricades. He sluggishly makes his way down into the pit, where the sounds of the city can no longer reach him. At the bottom, he collapses forward, landing in a pleading bow, a dogeza pose. His regrets and shame flood through, causing him to vomit. While questioning if he can find any sort of redemption, he hears footsteps approaching. Shiki looks up to find Ciel clad in a new battle dress, wielding the 7th Holy Scripture in its most terrifying form to date. Made 1,000 years ago by combining a unicorn's horn with the spirit of a deceased girl, this was a weapon created to counter reincarnation. Any hope he had of salvation crumbled in that moment. Now that it's clear he's Roa, Ciel's come to kill him. Shiki struggles to accept this as she slowly but sternly approaches him. When he mentions she promised to stay with him, she admits that if he weren't so compassionate, he might have been able to escape. She reaffirms she infiltrated his school to find Roa, and has suspected Shiki the entire time. The only reason she defended him from Noelle earlier is that it was simply too early. Unless Roa has actually awakened, she can't put an end to his reincarnation. She knew this time had come. It was just a matter of waiting and observing. The church initially suspected Akiha, but that was a minor setback. When researching the eldest son of the Tonos, Ciel learned about our Shiki being an adopted son. While this gave her some relief, she understood Roa could still transfer to him in a pinch. She then ruins Shiki's childhood by telling him he was never truly one of the demonic Tonos, and was only ever a puppet figure meant to serve as eldest son after the real Shiki Tono inverted. If it weren't for that incident 7 years ago, our Shiki would have never had any connection to Roa. She states, though, at this point, all of that is semantic. All that matters now is that he is Roa, and she won't hesitate to kill. He can deny it all he wants, but that'll just make things easier for her. To crush his spirit, she declares all of the fun times they've had together thus far were merely a ruse so that she could finally get this chance. Faced with this harsh reality, Shiki hardens himself in order to survive. Less naive, he asks Ciel how she was so certain the Tono family would be Roa's next choice. She responds by admitting it was because she chose them herself as Roa's previous incarnation 13 years ago. She recites the tale of her past, which matches up with the memories he inherited. a peaceful girl with loving parents was caught completely off guard by Roa's awakening. Despite all her efforts, she was unable to stop him from killing her family and neighbors, all while carrying her own consciousness through it. That chaos was short-lived, as Arcuate came to town and pierced Roa's heart. Roa's soul went on to the next host, the Tonos, but surprisingly, Ciel returned to being human. The church found her to be a rare sample, so they took her body and stored it away until, 6 years later, she woke up completely healed. As a bizarre after-effect of Roa's possession, her body couldn't die. To test the limits of this ability, the church went on to kill her over and over again. Every day for half a year, she was murdered in various ways, but each time she would regenerate. I still think the manga shows the horror of this best. Unsure of what to do with this phenomena, Ciel was ultimately transferred to the burial agency. Her own immortality is tied to Roa's, so until Roa is well and truly dead, she herself cannot die. Such a monster would normally be sealed away, but the burial agency found use in the magical knowledge she inherited from Roa. Her link to Roa lets her track him down, and so she became a vampire hunter for the chance to one day die as a human. Shiki refuses to believe her deepest desire is to die. It's just too cruel, but she stands firm to that statement. Either way, their conversation comes to a close. Conflict is inevitable. The seventh holy scripture operates by crushing souls, enforcing a doctrine that denies reincarnation to those it kills. With it, she can truly achieve her wish, but he won't let her without a fight. After guessing the weapon's range and speed, Shiki reasons he can't flee, and instead charges her with all his might. Being so close, he's barely able to dodge as the pile bunker passes right above his face. Despite its massive size, her weapon is one-handed, so he zones in on the opposite side. Even so, she's able to swing the entire thing around by pivoting from her legs. At blinding speed, it comes crashing into Shiki, launching him backward. The strike mangles his left arm, snapping it in two and peeling back the surrounding skin. While it's certainly painful, his vampire body isn't put out of commission by it. Ciel looks at him from a distance and asks if he's going to take out his knife. If she's willing to hurt him this badly, maybe he should. Getting more serious, he draws the knife, prompting Ciel to charge him this time. In the blink of an eye, she covers 6 meters and tries to blast his head off. He falls backward, taking the hit in his shoulder and throat. It leaves behind an exposed cavity, but Shiki remains surprisingly resilient. Witnessing this, Ciel remarks that his body is already that of a vampire's. She reloads her weapon, causing the fired casing to scatter as scraps of actual paper scripture. Without hesitation, she prepares for her next assault. As things stand, he's bound to be killed when she fires the third shot. This time, she asks if he intends to take his glasses off. Doing so might actually put them on more even ground. At first, he refuses. Being further away than their initial standoff, Shiki tries to run away, only to be impaled from behind by Ciel's black keys. He's getting used to this pain, and simply yanks the key stuck in his back out from his chest. She tries to talk him out of fleeing, claiming that he might survive if he actually fights back. Regardless, Shiki continues running, convinced she's only telling more lies. To put some distance between them, he leaps into a nearby abandoned building. His wound from the black key is already healed, but the areas where he was hit by the pile bunker haven't. He looks over and scurries to the nearest wall, only to look up and see the moon shining through the wreckage. With a break from the fight, he gains some clarity. His entire life has been a lie. He was never really a Tono, and Ciel was never really his ally. Thinking back to his mentor, Aoko, he considers that despite her goodwill, perhaps he just isn't supposed to be alive. Nevertheless, he still wants to live. Even if everything with Ciel is a lie, their time together still made him happy. He feels sadness, but not hatred. He can't bring himself to hate his beloved senpai. Thus, when Ciel catches up, he considers whether it's worth living on, even if it means killing her. Of course not. He loves her too much for that. Instead of taking off his glasses, he tosses away his knife, surrendering to his fate, preferring to die over making a terrible mistake. Pointing the tip of her pile bunker against his chest, Ciel asks why he's not even trying anymore. She reasons he has nothing to protect but himself. The senpai he knew was all a lie, but that doesn't matter. Shiki counters by saying their time together was precious, at least for him. CL's met all sorts of people throughout her life, but by far he's the most foolish. To complete her mission, she prepares to fire, but as a priest, she offers to give him his final confession. Rather than a statement, Shiki simply asks a question. If everything between them was a lie, why does she look like she's about to cry? She denies it, affirming her lack of emotion. The only thing she claims to care about is dying as a human. Shiki laments her cruelty, wondering if she'll continue to lie to herself. She, however, declares him the liar, that there's no way he actually wants to give up the fight. Obviously, this isn't an ideal scenario. What he truly wishes for is to continue those days where he, CL, and Arihiko would goof off together, even if it's all just a facade. No longer wanting to see CL's pained face, he closes his eyes and awaits his end. In that silence, however, Shiki's fears catch up to him. His heartbeat swells, and his mind pulses red. The idea of the scripture ramming through his chest is terrifying, but he forces himself to remain calm. This must show on his face, because he can hear CL asking why he doesn't hate her after all this. How can someone not resent their own killer? Well, Shiki knows none of this is her fault. To provoke him, she presses the tip of her weapon deeper and deeper, tearing into his flesh bit by bit. She thinks she can hurt him enough that it undoes her previous kindness. In return, she needs his hatred to justify killing him, but her provocation doesn't work. He fully understands that Roa needs to be struck down, and that she has to be the one to do it. It's tragic, but he doesn't blame her for that. With his eyes still closed, Shiki listens as CL pulls the trigger, causing a loud crash. Yet, there's no pain. At the last moment, she aimed away from him, unable to commit. Instead, CL breaks down, gasping out in long bouts of crying. The scripture falls to the ground, leaving a massive dent in the wall meant for Shiki. Putting aside the pain from his torn chest, he struggles to form words to console her. This kindness is unfair, bringing on even more of her tears. She can't do it. She can't kill someone so content and caring for her. Shiki admits he doesn't know what to do if she cries like that, which just makes her cry even louder. He sits up and pulls her into a gentle embrace. CL collapses forward into his chest, letting her tears flow as she apologizes. When he tells her she doesn't have to apologize, the two go quiet, enough that they can hear each other's hearts beating. Shiki comments on CL's warmth, but she asserts he's the warm one. How could she be so terrible to such a kind person? He doesn't think of himself so virtuously, but he is glad to be alive long enough to experience this moment. He confesses how important she is to him, and how he'd prefer to find a way for the two of them to be together. Specifically, he asks for her help in finding some other way to defeat Roa. In other words, he wants to win over Roa without having to die. As naive as this sounds, it's the only way for him to stay with CL. She admits she doesn't know how, but she's sure a method must exist. The church hasn't been around for 2,000 years for nothing, and if she searches hard enough, she's bound to find a solution. She just needs him to trust her while she searches, and since he loves her, that won't be a problem. Embarrassed by this blunt declaration, CL admits that she feels the same, that the two of them share a trusting relationship. Her cute face pushes him past the limit. He pulls her in even closer for a light, yet long-lasting kiss. Afterward, she tells him that was such a boy thing to do, but he remarks he had to since she's so adorable. Cuteness aside, Shiki feels like he's in good hands with CL. Their goal is to visit one of the church branches in Japan for research, but first, they need to do something about Roa's presence. For a more appropriate setting, they set out for her apartment. CL fetches and gives back Shiki's knife, before scouting for an easy way to ascend the pit. On their way out, they are interrupted by the sound of bells echoing in the distance. Normally, these are only heard ringing on Christmas, so they serve as a fitting distraction. The two are caught off guard when red stakes come flying at them. To protect Shiki, CL leaps in and is impaled by the sharp weapons. Shiki hears a familiar voice and looks up to find a nefarious vampire loli standing atop a stone pillar. We finally see it, Noelle in her vampire form after being treated with Araku's injections. After making her grand entrance, Noelle gracefully falls to the ground and condemns CL for being selfish. Why protect the person they're supposed to be killing? Being part vampire himself, Shiki can sense that she's on par with a rank 6 dead apostle. He doesn't realize she's Noelle yet, though, because she now looks like a 12-year-old. The moment she addresses Ciel as her senpai, however, the truth comes out. The vampire hunter is now a vampire herself, and yet she still insists that Shiki be killed. Apparently, Noelle's current form is exactly how she looked when she was 14 years old. Upon declaring as such, she calls upon about 30 of the dead who emerge from the edges of the pit. In the short time since she rose to power, Noelle's been busy gathering her own army of victims. Shiki draws out his knife, but Ciel's still stabbed through by several of the red stakes. The dead keep emerging, with about 50 in total surrounding the area. Even if Noelle insists on killing Roa, she herself has become just as much of a threat. Understanding this, Ciel rips out the stakes that pierced her and prepares for battle. Shiki's confident that Ciel can win, even if Noelle's truly a fully independent dead apostle. It seems Noelle knows this too, and tries to even the odds by breaking Ciel's spirit. As Noelle puts it, she's just fulfilling her vow to kill Roa. Becoming a vampire is just the means to an end, and considering Ciel failed to kill Roa herself, Noelle finds her transformation fully justified. After all, Noelle is weak, and without this power, she wouldn't be able to harm Roa. Thus, she blames Ciel, who should have taken care of this as the stronger one, for her current state. Given their mutually dark past, being blamed like this actually strikes a chord with Ciel. Perhaps Noelle's pitiful existence truly is her fault. Shiki, despite having Roa's memories, cannot fully comprehend how much guilt Ciel still holds from her past. While she's rendered silent by Noelle's taunts, he's not about to give in. He defends Ciel by stating that if there's anyone to be angry at, it should be him, not her. Roa's the real enemy after all, and there should be no reason to hate Ciel over it. Suddenly it clicks. Noelle realizes Shiki isn't fully aware of Ciel's past sins. Ciel gasps at the mention of such a secret being revealed. Thus, instead of fighting, Noelle decides to show Shiki the past as she remembers it. Her crimson eyes expand, drawing Shiki in with the sound of church bells and rose petals. His consciousness is completely enveloped by the red garden surrounding him, an effect of Noelle's mystic eyes, a unique principle she inherited from the idea blood of Rose-N, the Rose Princess. These mystic eyes of roses force people to see their owner's most dreaded visions. So I mentioned Lord Rose-N before, regarding dead apostles and their inability to reproduce like humans. He was a rare case of a vampire having a genuine family, because he became a dead apostle along with his 2 daughters. One of those 2 daughters was Rita Rose-N, a self-proclaimed artist who partakes in bloody baths, much like the legend of Elizabeth Bathory. While we don't know exactly how, it's pretty clear that Dr. Araku has a connection with the Rose-N vampires, and has formed her transformative syringes from Rita's blood. In effect, Noelle became a dead apostle mostly through Rita's influence, and as such, Noelle can make use of Rita's powers, including the mystic eyes. Like viewing an incredibly immersive film, Shiki is held captive, forced to watch Noelle's past from her own perspective. It was in the afternoon of Christmas Eve 2001, and Noelle was preparing to open the cafe that she lived at with her parents. While getting ready, she spoke to a foreign student who occasionally played piano at the cafe. At the time, Noelle was 14, about to turn 15 on Christmas Day. The student came to France to study music, and was indebted to Noelle's family for providing him food. As an early birthday present, he gave Noelle a piece of jewelry, a silver cross with a bell on it. The 2 of them chatted about how their local bakery has been closed quite often lately. Noelle was acquainted with the baker's daughter, but they hadn't spoken for a while. It's pretty obvious this bakery belonged to Ciel's family, back when she was known as Elysia, meaning that the bloody carnage of Roa was imminent. Noelle liked this guy, and didn't appreciate Elysia talking to him, so she was glad the bakery had been closed. After warning Noelle to be careful at night, the student finished some coffee and took off beneath the sunset. Without any friends to invite her to Christmas Mass, Noelle decided to stay at home and finish some schoolwork. Eventually, the sound of the cafe below reminded her of being alone, so she covered her ears and hid inside her bed. Unable to sleep through the night, Noelle got up at 7 to use the restroom and noticed the city being far too dark and quiet on a Christmas Eve. Naive to the chaos going on outside, she opened the door to her room and checked downstairs. In the cafe below, she found blood and bones smeared and scattered everywhere. Everything was broken, with dead bodies strewn about, but her parents were nowhere to be found. Noelle's urge to scream was halted only by her compulsion to vomit. In an eerie contrast, she heard cheering coming from the town square. Getting a better look, she confirmed a hellish concert of laughs and screams. Vampires hunted and murdered humans, celebrating with a massive bonfire made from burning corpses. Hoping to find her parents, Noelle evaded the vampires, making her way to the edge of the city. Sadly, there was no escape, as a massive 10-meter wall blocked everyone's path out. After some arguing, the adults who had escaped the square decided to try and climb the wall with some rope. Noelle went to join them, but was stopped at the last second by the exchange student from before. The two of them watched as more and more people gathered by the wall and were caught in a trap. From behind them, a second wall emerged, closing in and ultimately crushing everyone between the two. Over 100 people panicked and struggled as the walls compressed them into a red sludge. Like an industrial food processor, freshly squeezed blood seeped from the top. Above the wall, Noelle and the student spotted a series of distorted shadow figures. Most of them were humanoid, but further out were massive beings in the form of a fortress and a spider, respectively. The student told Noelle to run, and the two of them fled in the opposite direction. Drowned in guilt, Noelle recalled seeing her own mother among the people trapped inside the walls. Perhaps even worse, the town itself had become a breeding ground for various horrors. Captive victims were slaughtered and turned into cacti from which crimson roses would sprout forth. These victims still retained their faces, which were twisted into grotesque looks of pleasure. Other humans found themselves turning into six-legged insects and spiders, crawling about under the watch of the spider shadow from before. This sickening creature sang out its love for humans while killing them aimlessly. All the carnage among the city seemed as diverse as the shadowy figures presiding over it. Obviously, these guys are dead apostle ancestors. It'd be hard to identify them all, but it's clear to see Vlav standing there with his spear. As for the spider, we now have reason to believe that it's either Dr. Araku herself or somebody closely related to her. Perhaps she was even behind the creepy spider vamp Ciel fought during Arcoade's route. Noelle and the exchange student finally reached the church, which appeared to be a safe house from the vampires. Among those gathered at the chapel, Noelle found and embraced her father. About 50 survivors hid inside, praying for the break of dawn to free them, not realizing they had fallen for Roa's trap. After people stopped gathering, Roa, controlling Elysia's young body, stepped out into the open, complaining how few survivors actually turned to the church for salvation. Even so, that just made those who did come all the more worthy of sacrifice. Elysia prepared a bloody pit in the cathedral and used it to trap and torment her victims. While they couldn't escape, they would be horribly killed in a variety of ways for her amusement. First came Noelle's classmates. They had their limbs folded inward like a squid curling up from a fire. Others were snapped into the shape of boxes or flattened like carpets. Even her father was chosen to die, while she was being saved for last. Each sacrifice gathered in the pit, and those still alive buried their faces into its fleshy walls to avoid Elysia's haunting gaze. After days of this nightmare, the pit became full enough that the exchange student thought the survivors could pile up the corpses to reach the top and escape. Claiming he wanted to save Noelle, he convinced the others to form a hill of bodies while Elysia was away. Eventually, the student was able to climb out and pull Noelle from the pit. Outside the church, however, a horde of the dead stood guard, halting their escape. Despite saving her, the student's attitude completely switched when confronted with this obstacle. Hoping to now save himself instead, he shoved Noelle to the ground and shouted to the dead that a delicious girl was waiting for them. This idiotic move ironically just pulled the dead's attention to him. They rushed and devoured him as the noisy one, leaving Noelle to flee during the distraction. Her crushed throat made it impossible to scream, which actually helped her. Gaining some distance, she looked up at the church from the outside, believing her town to have been massacred to perform some sort of ritual. This ritual failed, however, when Elysia's body hit the ground in front of Noelle after being killed by a woman in white, aka Arcoade. Noelle wound up being the only survivor of what we mysteriously call the French incident. As to what exactly Roa and his buddies were trying to accomplish, we can only speculate at this point. Noelle's illusion fades, returning Shiki to the present. Despite horrible nausea, he still manages to stand. She looks on in shock, surprised he made it through the vision alive. A normal human could never endure such horrors. She was actually trying to kill both Shiki and Roa by putting them through that dream. In Shiki's mind, he actually hears Roa mention that it would have worked if those were the real mystic eyes of roses. Anyway, while Shiki survived the dream unscathed, it seems that revisiting all her past horrors has made Ciel into a paralyzed doll. With her eyes glazed over, she's unable to respond to Shiki calling out to her. Noelle tells him it's no use, and insists he pay attention because she's going to kill him more harshly than he could possibly imagine. First, though, she wants to know after seeing her dream whether he understands how truly evil Roa is, and how right she is for bearing such hatred. Knowing the truth, she wants him to apologize and gladly let himself be killed. As the dead start closing in around him, Shiki realizes the situation has gotten out of control. Rather than confronting Noelle directly, he scoops up Ciel with his left arm and uses his vampiric body to leap 10 meters over the circle of minions that surrounded them. The landing was painful, but nothing his body couldn't handle at this point. Seeing him run away brings Noelle immense joy. From atop another pillar, she announces how happy she is to get to hunt them down like rats. Her thrill for the chase might as well be sexual. As he runs, Shiki understands why Noelle would hate him. She has every right to hate Roa after what happened 13 years ago. Even so, that doesn't justify her current actions. To avoid becoming a yakitori skewer, he maintains a breakneck pace, as Noelle's stakes strike just behind him. Now that he knows the full gravity of Ciel's nightmarish past, he realizes why she wants to die. Her sins run so deep, and she feels she can never properly atone unless she kills Roa and then herself. This makes him happy to be alive, so that she doesn't have to deal with such a tragedy alone. Dodging the last of Noelle's stakes, he puts enough distance between them to hide among some ruined houses. He assumes that, because the stakes have stopped, Noelle can only detect moving targets. There's just enough space for him to safely hide Ciel and buy her time to wake up. He's confident that Noelle's mystic eyes weren't enough to completely kill Ciel's spirit, so he just has to hold out until she's had time to rest. She may be unresponsive, but Shiki gently hugs her, strokes her hair, and calls her name before setting out once more to the battlefield. Back in the center of the pit, Shiki confronts Noelle. To prevent him from escaping again, she fences in a small area around them with her stakes. With a delicate step, she lands on the ground and asks if he's given up trying to flee. She's glad he abandoned Ciel, since he no longer has to cling to his humanity. Noelle was faster than her own minions, so there's about a solid minute before they catch up. The cage she set down is about 40 meters in diameter. He could try to jump out again, but figures he'd be falling for her trap. The only way out is to fight directly. Prepared to kill, Shiki removes his glasses. While he understands and accepts her hatred, he cannot afford to lose. Considering Noelle's primary weapons are her stakes, he reasons he can only survive 2 hits from them. She makes the first move, jumping in to rush him. In response, he flings himself backward, barely dodging as a stake grazes the tip of his nose. He swings at an exposed death line on her belly, but she repels him with her elbow, sending him flying back. She's impressed, but taunts that if he can't kill her now, she'll only grow stronger. Leaning up against the fence of skewers, he admits he underestimated the strength of her petite body. He can feel the wound she inflicted on his shoulder healing up, which causes more pain than the actual strike. Taking this moment, he counters her taunting to ask why she's even fighting. After all, she doesn't have a way to permanently kill Roa. If she wins, it'll mean Ciel stays immortal, and Roa just finds a new body. So what's the point? She admits that, at least right now, killing Roa here won't accomplish much, but it doesn't matter. What does matter is that she enjoys killing Shiki and Ciel. Making them suffer is reason enough for her. Even if Ciel remains immortal, that just means Noelle can kill her again and again. She suggests drowning Ciel in a pool of concentrated sulfuric acid, for instance. Hearing this, Shiki declares this to be their last exchange of words, asking if she'll spare Ciel if he lets himself be killed. Nope. Noelle asserts that he's merely an appetizer, and that tormenting Ciel is the main dish. By now, her minions have gathered around the fence, and Shiki's damage has fully healed. This time, he charges first, and stops with just enough time to duck beneath her weapon's thrust. Even so, she doesn't have to stab him. With just the flick of her middle finger, Shiki is once again sent flying into the surrounding fence. The reverberating sound enrages the dead, who grab him between the bars. Noelle practically climaxes from seeing her own immense strength. She used to think of vampires as worthless insects, but now she's so high on power that she declares it's the other way around. Humans are inferior for only being able to live and die once. Her minions are instructed to remain outside and only attack if he tries to leave. That way, she can thoroughly enjoy their fight in an elegant fashion, like a ballroom dance. Stepping from the fence once more, Shiki feels he understands what he's up against. When Noelle charges him with another thrust, he lets it impale his left hand so that he can pull it aside. It's so strong it blows his arm into mincemeat, but he considers that a reasonable sacrifice, a cheap price to pay for reaching her exposed neck. With the perfect opportunity to finish her off, however, he hesitates, instead incurring another strike that blasts him away. Even so, it was a close call for Noelle, so close that she can't help but check to see if her head is still attached. She realizes the genuine danger faced from fighting Shiki in close combat, and takes this chance to leap up onto another pillar. While she denies it, she's definitely afraid, but still poses a threat even from a distance. She orders her minions to step through the fence and attack Shiki one at a time, hoping to whittle down his resolve. Normally, the dead wouldn't stand a chance against him, but Shiki's still heavily injured while his body heals. He can cut his way through plenty of them, but how long can he hold out? In a barely conscious state, he relies on his vampire vitality to carve into about 40 of her minions. Noelle watches, impressed by his resilience, before deciding to crush his spirits all at once. The bell tolls again, and a second army of the dead rises from beneath Flav's ruined lair. By calling upon their remains, she gains another 100 minions with ease. If not for her manipulating their movements, Shiki would have been overrun by now. It's her desire to torment him that ironically helps him survive. Nevertheless, he endures, making Noelle question why he has the will to fight when he knows he'll just be taken over by Roa anyway. The longer Shiki holds out, the angrier she gets, until she violently asks why he refuses to die. After throwing another stake out of frustration, she accuses him of fighting only because his brain must have become zombified already. To correct her, he affirms he's still waiting for Ciel. His confidence is what's keeping him going. Shiki's defiant attitude spoils Noelle's mood. Foregoing the gradual torment, she aims to kill him all at once, unfurling the fence of skewers and assembling them in the air as a long chain. Declaring this to be the end, she sends this chain of skewers straight toward Shiki, only to be shocked when a black key strikes them away mid-flight. Only one person could have done this, meaning that Ciel has recovered from her earlier trauma. Sure enough, from atop the rubble, Ciel stands ready to fight once more. She had overcome her own horrors, recalling that nightmaric ritual in France. She couldn't control herself, nor could she kill herself, only able to watch events as they unfolded. She remembered having nearly defeated Archewade that night. The true ancestor princess had fallen into Elysia's hands, but before she could be devoured, another intruder came by and tipped the scales. Ultimately, it was Elysia who was killed. Roa's ritual with the 5 other dead apostle ancestors was thwarted by the uninvited appearance of a 6th. Reflecting on this dark past, Ciel's consciousness wandered. At first, she thought she needed to stay alive in order to be useful to others. After seeing Noelle become so corrupted, however, she feels responsible for making things even worse. Perhaps she really should just die. At the same time, though, Ciel remembered Shiki stroking her hair. She knew he went out to fight on his own and was waiting for her to return to him. Despite all the trouble she's caused, there was one boy who wanted and needed her for exactly who she was. Before leaving her to rest, he told her she'll never be forgiven if she can't even forgive herself. She knows the past can't be fixed. What's gone is gone, but even so, she's held on to her humanity and tried to make the future brighter. That's not something she did just because she had a strong body. What made the difference was the strength of her heart. There's meaning in that conviction, because at the very least, it saved him, and now he lives for the chance to be with her, to hear her laugh and enjoy life. Just like she told him when he was at his worst, salvation can come to sinners if they have a good heart. She may struggle with her guilt all her life, but he's willing to walk that path beside her. Her own inner voice denied these kind words, arguing that Roa was just the trigger. Deep down, she must have wanted to do all those horrible things. Someone like her isn't worth loving, and yet Shiki fell for her all the same. Even after knowing her past, he accepted her, and it's that compassion that has come around to save her this time. As such, Ciel gained the determination to wake herself up and face the world again. Standing before Noelle once more, Ciel confronts her hatred. Delighted by the chance to torment Ciel again, Noelle unleashes her mystic eyes a second time. It has no effect. No longer afraid of her past, the dream cannot consume Ciel. Instead, she advises that using the eyes too much could destroy Noelle. Furthermore, since those eyes are merely replicas of the real thing, they can be countered by superior powers. Having taken on the idea blood of other dead apostles, Ciel's own magical energy proves to be stronger when she actually invokes it. Obviously outmatched, Noelle instead taunts her, explaining that her dead are still around to threaten Shiki. Once again, Noelle fails to intimidate, as Ciel declares she's already taken care of that. From the sky above, an entire swarm of black keys rains down, absolutely destroying the remaining minions in a single strike. Noelle can no longer use Shiki as a hostage. With conviction, Ciel agrees that she can never make up for her past. Her sins will always be a part of her, but so will her desire to protect Shiki. While Noelle has every right to try and kill her, Ciel simply won't let herself die. Preparing to attack, Noelle conjures more of her skewers in the air. In turn, Ciel readies the seventh holy scripture, declaring that their morally ambiguous situation can only be settled through force. They've both done evil things, but are trying to do what they think is right. Noelle considers her senpai a pain to the very end, and starts their battle by hurling stake after stake like bullets, or perhaps meteors. She may hold an advantage from afar, but Ciel is able to deflect those attacks and close the gap almost instantly. Noelle uses her stakes as a wall to block the scripture, but they shatter from a single hit. Fighting Shiki all this time has made her weaker than before, so she can only defend herself from Ciel's devastating blows. Despite her tough act, Noelle has always been aware of Ciel's ridiculous strength. Deep down, she knew it would come to this. Wave after wave of skewers only hope to hold Ciel back a little at a time. This one-sided dynamic reminds Noelle of their past, sparring as fellow church executors. Even with her vampire powers, she can never seem to beat her rival. Noelle always considered herself to be in the right, but looking back on it, she recognizes her desire for cruelty, the terrible things she did to her own victims, and how she became a vampire and killed 50 people just to satisfy her revenge. Pushed to her last remaining stake, Noelle wields it like her halberd. The fight truly reminds her of her past, forcing her to admit that this was never about Roa's potential future victims. In truth, she's just been wanting to kill Ciel, whom she blames for the fall of her hometown. Even in the heat of battle, Ciel finds this confession incredibly tragic. To settle their rivalry once and for all, she turns the scripture into its sword form and rends Noelle from inner leg to shoulder. Blown back and bloody, Noelle can only use her weapon as a crutch to remain kneeling in the rubble. Ciel declares that Noelle wasn't wrong for becoming a vampire, but rather for acting like one. In the name of God, Ciel vows to slay Noelle. On the verge of death, Noelle finally realizes her situation. She's no longer a sister of the church, no longer an executor. She'd become the very thing she used to hunt. That said, she's not prepared to die, not at the hands of someone she can't forgive. She thinks back to when Dr. Araku made her into a vampire. There was still one last injection available, but she was warned not to use it, as her body was already pushing the limit as is. Having nothing left to lose, though, Noelle takes this final injection, causing her body to surge and explode into a swarm of thorny vines. In absolute agony, she lashes out at Ciel, begging to be released from this pain while continuing to fight. While a somber, bittersweet melody plays, she admits that despite everything that came between them, she respected Ciel's skill as an executor. If only they'd met under different circumstances. Why did it have to turn out like this? As Noelle launches forward with her stake, Ciel recognizes the need to put her out of this misery. In an act of pity, Ciel dodges the attack and plunges her pile bunker into Noelle's chest. With her heart pierced beyond repair, Noelle can only beg in futility. She begs for her father, mother, and original life to be returned, but eventually her body burns away into scattered ashes. The ruins become quiet, and it can be seen that Ciel never actually fired her pile bunker. Noelle's soul wasn't crushed, though it's not like she could reincarnate like Roa. Her body gave out before Ciel could pull the trigger. Reflecting on their past, Ciel notes that Noelle was an executor for 5 years, which is quite long considering most agents either die or retire after just one. When they met again at the church, Ciel recognized Noelle, but was surprised to see that she'd become 6 years older since the French incident. 2 years later, Noelle incurred the wrath of a priest, and in order to remain in the church, she begged Ciel to take her on as a disciple. She wasn't cut out for such dangerous work, but Ciel still agreed to train her. Across those 5 years, she really struggled, and without Ciel's help, she would have quit much sooner. Things would have been better off like that. Weeping for the loss, Ciel apologizes for not being able to return the things she took from her. The night grows colder, and Shiki suggests they head back so she can change into a warmer outfit. When Ciel turns around to explain she'll be just fine, she notices his heavily damaged body. She wants to tend to his wounds, but since he's a vampire, her sacraments would only make things worse. He states what he really needs is rest and some food back at her apartment. Just when things seem to be calming down, he's assailed by another headache. Debilitated, he is at the mercy of Ciel, who picks him up and supports him on the way back. If you know anything about Tsukihime's sequel, Kagetsutoya, you'll know that the 7th Holy Scripture can take the form of Nanako, the girl/unicorn used to build the weapon. But since she won't manifest on command, Ciel has to help Shiki and carry the weapon together. Now that's impressive. Watching from atop a nearby building, Arcuade reflects on what just transpired. She declares Ciel to be her greatest obstacle, only to be confronted by something more urgent. Mario's here, and he's had enough of Arcuade's unrestrained actions. He considers her dangerous, and has come with reinforcements from the church to take her down. He acknowledges how inefficient this is. The 30 men under his command will likely die fighting, but since they've come with anti-True Ancestor armaments, they might just get the job done anyway. She praises him for planning this attack so thoroughly. Mario interrogates her as to why she isn't going after Roa now that it's clear he's still around. They've come to a misunderstanding. Arcuade says Ciel will get in the way, so she needs a chance for them to be alone. She can't fight Ciel because she doesn't want Shiki to hate her. In truth, she has no intention of harming Shiki, even if Roa's inside him. Arcuade leaps into the air and begins to fight Mario's soldiers. Her twisted smile is all he needs to justify attacking her. Even with their weapons, however, the soldiers fail to so much as touch her. With no trouble, Arcuade slays the soldiers, returns to Mario, and carves off his limbs. Frustrated, he can't seem to understand her motive. To avoid succumbing to bloodlust, she needs to regain the power Roa stole from her, so why doesn't she plan to kill Shiki? The way she sees it, she doesn't need to kill him. She's already got both of the things she wants in the same place. Roa entering Shiki's body was an ideal outcome. Clearly, she has a plan to solve this mess, and Mario's just been a nuisance to that plan. Meanwhile, Shiki and Ciel arrive back at her apartment. She offers him room to relax while she prepares dinner. Once inside, she asks if Shiki's headache feels any better. Surprisingly, it does, thanks to a barrier she's put around the home. Before Ciel can start cooking, Shiki makes a request of her. She thinks it's about the menu, but he actually asks her to change her outfit. Given what just happened between them, he's a bit intimidated by her combat attire. To make him feel comfortable, Ciel runs to her room and changes into her school uniform. They have dinner, and Ciel treats his left arm as best she can. Her apartment is able to suppress Roa to an extent, but that's only to buy them time for her to head to the church and research a cure. It's been 13 years since the church had her as a sample, so surely they've discovered something useful in that time. Even if they find a cure, though, the church isn't exactly the safest place. They may treat him as a heretic, but no matter what happens, she vows to keep him safe. Even if there are dangers, Shiki is willing to trust Ciel because he loves her. At first, she'll go by herself, and so she asks him to remain in her apartment for a week. He agrees to this plan, but starts to think of the future should they actually succeed. Given that he's doing all of this to stay with her, he clarifies that he wants to become her lover and requests the two of them start dating. CL gets embarrassed by his serious tone, but it's clear this is something he really wants. She understands this means he wants her to keep on living even after regaining her mortality. That's something she can accept, but she doesn't feel like love is something she deserves. Instead, she intends to live out her days atoning for her previous sins. Shiki thinks this is admirable, to fight to atone rather than fighting to die. Even so, he says she can do that while also finding her own happiness. She tries to argue that she's only good for fighting, but he uses her school life to prove her wrong. Still reluctant, CL argues that her own true happiness is out of reach, like seeing a rainbow during the nighttime. She's flattered by his concern, but she simply can't return to being a student or his lover, not after she tried to kill him. She's ashamed for deceiving and hurting him so cruelly. Shiki, on the other hand, has already forgiven her. He considers being chased by the girl he loves to be a valuable experience. Staying positive, he compliments her appearance. Between the new armor and her lack of glasses, she gave off an older vibe tonight. Embarrassed, CL admits that she actually is quite a bit older than him, but her body hasn't aged at all since she was taken over by Roa at the age of 12. With that, I want to apologize for getting my facts wrong in a previous video. Noelle has always been older than CL. She was about to turn 15 on Christmas, so she's actually the older one by nearly 3 years. Earlier, CL was actually shocked that, as a teacher, Noelle was pretending to be even younger than she really was. But wait a second, you're telling me CL's got a 12-year-old body? I call bullshit. That's crazier than Artoria's body being 15. I get it. Some people mature more quickly than others. But really? Maybe it's a good thing this isn't localized to the masses. I'm only kidding, of course. I just want to affirm that she is not a loli, nor a child, and people who waifu CL aren't doing so because they like the look of a 12-year-old. From every possible angle, CL's body is youthful, but totally within range of being a young adult. Even so, what matters most is that Shiki loves CL regardless of her circumstances. The girl he met is the one he wants to be with forever. He proclaims he'll follow her to the bottom of hell if it makes her laugh. He'll stubbornly persist to make her happy, no matter if she denies it. Putting out his right hand, he waits for her reply. CL admits that if he tells her something like that, she has no choice but to surrender completely. With a smile, she reaches her hand to his. She's not confident about herself, but Shiki gives her strength. Sincerely, she agrees to be lovers, but states that since they're going to go through with it, she loves him 10 times, no, 100 times more. Shiki basks in his joy until the clock strikes midnight. When they consider getting some sleep, they both offer each other the bed at the same time. Rather than having one of them sleep on the floor, they decide to share the bed. Flustered, CL runs off to take a shower. Ultimately, 5 hours pass, and neither of them are able to catch a wink of shut-eye. Thankfully, the best time for Shiki to rest is during daybreak, when Roa is at his weakest. CL, on the other hand, intends to head out early and look for a cure at the nearest branch of the Holy Church. Shiki wonders if the church would even let a vampire like him in, but she says because he hasn't killed anyone, they can sneak him through the back door or something. That said, he feels terrible about how he lashed out at Kohaku. He doesn't feel innocent at all, especially when his memories of the past few days are spotty. From her own experience, CL assures him that if he had killed anyone under Roa's influence, he definitely would have remembered it. With that said, CL changes into her church attire. There's always the chance that she can't find a way to exorcise Roa, but she puts that aside, declaring she won't let Shiki die. She will find a way to save him. Remaining optimistic, she sets out, promising to return as soon as possible. All Shiki has to do is remain in her apartment. Teasingly, she tells him not to go cheating on her while she's away. She gets jealous after all. Finally able to sleep, Shiki dreams of Roa. Roa, who seeks eternity, remarks how his objective was changed after meeting Arcuade. At first, he yearned to observe the world eternally, to learn about and understand all things. Upon developing feelings for Arcuade, however, he began to wish for not just observing eternity, but also playing an active role in history's events. As such, he blames her for robbing him of his purity. That's pretty rich coming from the bastard who manipulated her into drinking his blood. Shiki wakes up, having slept all throughout the day. It's past midnight again when he's assaulted by more headaches. Roa seeks to kill Shiki, attacking his brain from the inside. The pain in Shiki's head causes him to fall to the floor, convulsing. After coughing up blood, the pain drives him to thrash and break CL's table with his forehead. He's only been awake for 10 minutes, so the thought of enduring 6 hours until daybreak is unbearable. The pain is unlike anything he's felt before, and he suspects it's the result of being within CL's boundary. Fearing he'll die before she can return to him, he considers leaving the apartment in spite of her warning. Doing so is obviously dangerous, but it has to be better than dying in captivity. Compelled by an urge to see the golden moon, Shiki steps out into the world and wanders the streets. Thankfully, he makes his way to the park without encountering anyone. Beneath the moonlight, his headache finally subsides. Looking back down, he finds the moon illuminating Arkawade, as though she were waiting for him. She calls him her lovely murderer. Somehow, his perception of Arkawade seems to have fused with Roa's memories of her as the true ancestor princess. Shiki assumed Arkawade would have left the city by now, so her presence must mean that she knows Roa's still alive. He can't greet her happily like before. Choosing his words carefully, Shiki tries to avoid revealing he's Roa's new host, fearing she'll kill him in an instant. It's a hollow effort considering Arkawade already knows the truth. Her crimson eyes pierce his vision, petrifying him in place. Being part vampire, he can now sense much more clearly just how dangerous she is. Arkawade calls him a fool for trusting CL, saying that if he'd only kept his distance, he wouldn't have had to fight her and Noelle. At the same time, Arkawade asserts she could have found even crueler ways of tormenting him for betraying her. Putting the topic of CL aside, she asks Shiki what it's like to have Roa inside him. Is it similar to the bloodlust that made him kill her back at the start of this ordeal? He insists she stop calling him a murderer. For whatever reason, his desire to kill Arkawade is something entirely separate. She agrees, recalling the exact moment she realized Shiki had become Roa's vessel. Since it was such a rare situation, she suspected it was a trap at first, but at this point, she's just accepted it as it is. The more Arkawade mentions Roa, the more Shiki's vision begins to flood with Roa's memory of her. In an old castle where flowers bloomed beneath the moonlight, Roa set eyes on the princess of true ancestors, a tool meant to slay her own kin. For the first time ever, Roa fell in love, gazing at her white beauty. With each reincarnation, Roa's soul and personality change according to the mind of his vessels. The only aspect of his original self that remains is this adoration for Arkawade. It was the very moment his pure pursuit of eternity became corrupt. He felt the only way to regain his purity was to utterly defeat her. That's why he took advantage of her naivete and forced her to drink his blood. In that sense, he corrupted her in exchange for corrupting him. From then on, she would hunt him, and he would be hunted. And through that process, Roa trusted that Arkawade would bring him to the eternity he seeks. Still at the park, Arkawade simply observes as Shiki experiences this memory. She asks if he's planning to escape, or perhaps let her kill him without a struggle. Shiki declares his intent to defeat Roa, to avoid fully becoming a vampire. This resolve confirms her assessment of him. Unlike Roa's other victims, Arkawade believes Shiki is actually capable of keeping Roa in check. Their time together thus far leads her to confide in Shiki's resolve. Even so, she refuses to let Shiki resolve this matter with the church. She herself needs to be the one to handle Roa. Shiki points out the futility in that logic. Whenever she kills Roa, he only reincarnates again. Proceeding like that won't ever return her power, the blood she gave him. The mere mention of her missing power triggers her rage, until he clarifies that her power wasn't given, but rather taken from her. Arkawade clarifies that if the church seals Roa, he'll still continue to feed off her power. On the other hand, if she kills Roa herself, she at least buys herself about 10 years when he's not drawing that power. That said, this current predicament serves as a unique opportunity. While Shiki and Roa have fused together, neither of them have overwritten the other's consciousness. That means it's possible for Shiki to maintain control over his own will. Arkawade doesn't necessarily need her power back. As long as that power continues to serve her, it's basically the same thing. In other words, Arkawade is asking Shiki to become her servant. She's serious about this proposal. By becoming her servant, Shiki will gain the strength to dominate over Roa's will. In return, he can substitute for her missing power by acting on her behalf. It's obviously a huge change, but it's a surefire way for him to actually preserve his identity. Hearing this plan, Roa begins to rampage inside Shiki, warning him not to believe Arcoade's words, that she simply wants to make him into her doll. Ironically, Shiki agrees that this isn't a good idea. He considers what it means to overpower Roa. Rather than, say, stopping his headaches, it would be more like becoming numb to their effect. He fears he'd be winning over Roa at the cost of his own humanity. Refusing to comply, Shiki removes his glasses and pulls out his knife. Unfazed, Arcoade says it can't be helped. She'll just have to take him by force. Since he killed her before, perhaps this is her chance to pay him back. Arcoade rushes forward, giving Shiki no time to think. Her claws clash with his blade, and they repeat this collision under the moonlight. Responding to a survivalist instinct, Shiki's body moves on its own to continually deflect her attacks. As much as he hates to admit it, he can only hold his ground because his body is that of a vampire's. It's advantageous, but he doesn't want to become like Noelle, losing sight of his human ethics. Even with this enhanced body, however, he can't hold out much longer. Furthermore, he can't see her death lines, leaving him no way to fight back. Between slashes, Arcoade lands a palm strike on Shiki's shoulder, sending him backward. He survives, but he has no hope of winning. She remarks that since he's so strong, he should just kill Roa himself by committing suicide. Even if he could, Shiki's fighting so that he doesn't have to die. When he refuses to stab himself, Arcoade informs him that if he uses his eyes more precisely, he can actually kill souls without harming the body. While risky, it's possible for him to kill just Roa's soul and still stay alive himself, though there's also the chance that his soul will die in the process. Shiki begs for time to consider this option, but Arcoade denies him. She rushes in again, taking him off guard. His attempt to slash at her face does absolutely nothing, but when he tries to jump back a bit, he winds up leaping a whole 5 meters. His body's more agile than ever. That said, when Arcoade's claws swipe, they're powerful enough to send pressurized wind his way. To escape, he leaps high into the air. Impressed by having a vampire's strength, he can perform at a greater level. Unfortunately, Arcoade matches his pace, slamming him back down into the ground and plummeting down from above. Her consecutive attacks overwhelm him, and when he can resist no further, she tackles him to the floor. Arcoade has won the fight, but doesn't go for the kill. Instead, she stares at him in silence. Her closeness is enough to take his breath away. While Arcoade wants to kill Roa, she'd much rather keep Shiki alive. She wants him to change his mind and accept her proposal. She needs her power back from Roa to suppress her bloodlust, but she couldn't bear to drink Shiki's blood to obtain it. She feels she's found the perfect solution and confesses she's doing this because she loves him. If Shiki wants a life with Ciel, however, he can't accept Arcoade's offer. The choice we're given right here is the divergence point between Ciel's normal ending and her true ending. We'll be going for the normal one first. Thus, when Arcoade begs him to just become hers so she doesn't have to kill him, he refuses. Cruelly, the reason he gives is that she's a vampire and he's not. He says she's changed since they first met, that she's just like Roa now. Shiki brings his knife to her neck but stops short, with no murderous intent. Comparing her to Roa, an evil blood-sucking vampire, is perhaps the meanest thing he could say, and yet that's how he rejects her. Understandably, she's hurt, angry even, and in this state of vulnerability, her condition changes. Shiki spots a faint death line across her neck and uses it as his chance to escape. In a swift motion, he cuts the line and she collapses. Squirming out from beneath her straddle, he puts distance between them and remains vigilant. He intentionally took advantage of Arcoade's feelings to fight against her. He thought the attack would only weaken her, but instead she remains perfectly still as a pool of blood forms around her. Did he actually kill her? There's no way it could be that easy. Sure enough, moments later, Arcoade begins to push herself back up, drenched in the crimson pool. As though Shiki opened the gates of hell, she slowly rises, cursing him for his betrayal. Step by step, she regains her strength, threatening to kill him while her throat still bleeds out. With a maniacal, vacant smile, she lifts her head, almost thrilled about the destruction she'll bring. In just a moment, she vows to get her revenge, and yet he can't bring himself to run. He understands that it's pointless. Absolutely frozen, he waits for Arkawade to regain her strength. If left alone, he'll surely die. Thankfully, Ciel comes back from the church just in time to defend him. Before Arkawade can recover, Ciel impales her with black keys, runs in close, and slams the 7th Holy Scripture into her gut. Countering the blow, Arkawade tries to deflect it with her claws, causing the scripture to shatter on impact. Arkawade starts pulling out the stakes in a rage, cursing Ciel for interfering. It'll take a while for her to free herself, so Ciel jolts Shiki into action. They need to escape while they still can. She grabs him by the arm and drags him into the city. On the run, Shiki apologizes for leaving the apartment on his own. Ciel reasons it was only a matter of time till they fought each other over this. Because it's deserted at night, the two of them head for the school. Ciel wants Shiki to hide in the building while she battles Arkawade outside. Given this is Roa's former lair, it's a suitable location to finish this. Furthermore, by placing mage sigils on the walls, Ciel can set traps for Arkawade along the way. Since Arkawade is linked to Roa by her stolen power, they would have had to suppress Arkawade anyway in order to keep Roa's will at bay. Even without the 7th Holy Scripture, Ciel is confident she can make do with her other weapons and abilities. Shiki thinks she's just trying to put on a brave face, and requests the help in the fight. Ciel reminds him that she's immortal. Since she can't be killed, it makes sense she'd be the one fighting. Shiki, while resilient, can still die from strong enough wounds, so she wants him to hide on the 3rd floor and wait for her. Her efforts to reassure him fail, so she instead asks him to just once let her protect him. If he really wants her to smile, this is what she needs him to do. Letting her compassion flow, Ciel steps in and hugs Shiki, admitting her trip to the church was a bust. Of all the research they had on Roa, none of it had any clue as to how to separate him from his host without killing them both. She blames herself for spending all these years looking for ways to kill Roa instead of cure his victims. At this point, all she can do is save him from Arkawade and delay the inevitable. Shiki comforts Ciel by stating if things had happened differently, he may not have ever gotten to fall in love with her, so he'd rather be in this situation right now, for better or worse. After all, Shiki hasn't given up. Thinking back on what Arkawade said, it's still possible to kill Roa's soul separate from himself. Thus, Shiki says he'll deal with Roa and leave Arkawade to Ciel. Before the battle, he goes to kiss Ciel, but she evades, reasoning that a kiss would make her too happy to focus on the fight. Instead, they promise to celebrate after they make it out alive, which includes finally hanging out in the city with Arihiko. With that settled, the two separate. Shiki remains on the 3rd floor while Ciel goes to meet her foe. By himself, he considers the risk involved with cutting his own lines. There's certainly no guarantee he'll be able to kill just Roa's soul. Even so, he feels this is what he was meant to do with these eyes. His thought is interrupted by a loud crash. Arkawade must have breached the 1st floor. Originally, Arkawade had pride as a true ancestor, being sure not to harm humans and not cause a scene. In her current state, however, there's no telling what sort of destruction she'll cause. Unable to just sit back and hope for the best, Shiki decides to head out and check on the fighting. He descends the stairs into an absolute hellscape. Blood is spattered all throughout the ruined hallway. Black keys are scattered about, and even worse, Arkawade has Ciel by the neck, pinning her to the wall. Arkawade's free hand cuts Ciel open, starting from her neck and slicing down past her chest. Arkawade's claws make it easy to pry open the bones and tissue protecting Ciel's heart. In loud, forceful motions, she rips off Ciel's flesh from head to groin. Frozen in place, Shiki screams at Arkawade, but is unable to respond as she turns her head, revealing her demented face. She tells him to wait his turn, while continuing to torment her current victim. Arkawade reasons that if she takes Roa's power back, rather than vanquishing him, Ciel will still remain immortal. If that happens, Ciel will never be able to die as a human, and will instead be continually ripped apart for Arkawade's pleasure. Demonstrating this cruelty, Arkawade rips Ciel's heart out, along with the organs connected to it. Shiki is desperate to save Ciel, but it seems Roa still has affections for Arkawade. To shut Roa up, Shiki smacks his own head into the wall and opens his eyes wide in search of death lines. Staring deeply ahead, exerting his brain past its limit, he sees tons of lines, but not one of them on Arkawade's body. He then recalls what CL told him about true ancestors. They're nature spirits, deriving power from the planet itself. Thus, rather than looking for death lines on Arkawade directly, he starts looking for death lines on the Earth. Through the destroyed wall, he looks out to the school's athletic field and finds a point where several lines intersect. He knows that pursuing this target will leave him vulnerable, but he's gotta move quick if it means sparing CL more torment. Right away, Arkawade picks up on Shiki's actions, drops CL, and tries to intercept him. Ignoring her golden eyes, Shiki sprints out onto the field, relying on his vampire legs to outpace her. Just in time, he stabs his blade into the planet's lifeline, sending a pulse out from the point of impact. Arkawade is just behind, and as she nears him, he can finally see death lines on her body. Sadly, she arrives too soon, piercing a hole straight through his chest with her claws. Shiki acknowledges that this would be immediately fatal for a human. Right now, though, he's not a human. With the little strength he can still muster, he retaliates by stabbing a death line on her chest. Barely conscious, Shiki hears Arkawade express pain. Not much pain, though. She genuinely says ouch, on the level of a bruise or scrape. That's not enough. Shiki means to kill her. Trying to drag the knife further in, he screams at her to die already. At the very least, get lost. He'll take care of Roa on his own. She refuses to comply, instead trying to crush Shiki's skull in her one-handed grip. To escape, Shiki yanks his knife across her arm, forcing her to let go. He's free, but clearly dying. He falls over, making Arkawade cry out for him. Her compassion assures him that she's returning to her former self. She begs him to become her servant again. There's still time, and she'll even forgive him for loving CL. Dying here would be pointless, simply letting Roa find another host. Even so, Shiki cannot become a vampire. He realizes that Roa was just an ordinary human too, at first. Roa became corrupt over the desire for eternity, and Shiki fears that he too will lose himself as a vampire. It's not a matter of hating Arkawade. In fact, he finds her phenomenally gorgeous, especially under the moonlight. He's happy to see her happy, but sadly they've both pushed each other to their limit. Arkawade strangely smiles as she admits nobody else has ever hurt her this much before. She's not going to die, but she does have to return to her castle and heal through a deep slumber. With a hint of their usual banter, Shiki tells her to go on and get. When she wishes he'd say something nice, he once again calls her an idiot for not showing him her weaker side. Disappearing in a white haze, she tells him she likes that part of him. At the very last moment, they were able to interact like when they were allies. As lovely as that is, Shiki still has to take care of Roa. In the worst-case scenario, his mind will die from overusing his mystic eyes. That would allow Roa to take over, and if his body healed up, he'd go on a rampage just like CL once did. As such, Shiki has no choice but to gamble on Arkawade's words. If he stabs the death line of his soul, it could kill Roa, but it could also kill him just as easily. It's not a safe choice, but it's what needs to be done. While trying to calmly make his decision, CL comes running to stop him. He knows that if he looks at her, he'll have a change of heart, so instead he closes his eyes and plunges the knife into himself. Penetrating his soul doesn't make a sound, nor does it harm any of his flesh. Painlessly, Shiki's consciousness fades as CL repeatedly calls out to him in tears. Next, we see that it's a sunny day out in the plaza. On a stroll through the plaza, Shiki sits down on a bench and starts chatting with a priest on the bench behind him. The priest, concentrating on reading his book, stops to politely engage Shiki in conversation. Concerned, Shiki asks why the priest went through the trouble of reincarnation. The priest explains he wanted to surpass his human limitations and achieve eternity so he could learn the meaning of humanity. A harsh wind starts blowing in, so Shiki announces he'll be heading home. The priest, on the other hand, says this is his final destination. As they part, the priest declares that while seeing a rainbow at night may be impossible, the only reason it's impossible is because people haven't yet achieved it. In that regard, nothing is truly impossible. Even in the dark, you can still cast a rainbow. The priest sets his book down, and its pages scatter to the wind and vanish. Shiki wakes up in a hospital bed, surprised to be alive. Nobody else is around, just him connected to an IV drip. There's a large bandage over his chest, and when he removes it, there appears to be no major injury whatsoever, not even a scar. For a moment, he glances to the open door and sees a small child looking at him. Before they can interact, the boy walks off, leaving Shiki with a tinge of nostalgia. Breaking the silence, Arihiko comes barging in, and when Shiki asks what he's doing, he says he was already asked the same thing yesterday. Arihiko reiterates that Shiki's been in a coma for about a month. While he's recovered, he still needs to rest for a day. He struggles to remember bits and pieces of Arihiko's testimony, as well as the events leading up to his hospitalization. Apparently, a third-year student found him passed out on the school grounds, which is odd considering he doesn't have any club activities to keep him on campus that late. After being comatose for over a week, the doctors started to give up on him, and yet he suddenly woke up just yesterday with a hearty appetite. Arihiko, Akiha, and Senpai had been visiting him in the hospital every day when there was no hope. Arihiko even jokes that during that time, he and Akiha may or may not have hooked up. Yeah, right. For some reason, Shiki can't remember CL at all, but Arihiko tells him that she was visiting every day, and when he woke up, he immediately hugged her. Shiki's spotty memory concerns him, but he feels compelled to just ignore the feeling that something's missing. The next day, Shiki returns to the Tono mansion, taking a detour to visit the garden in the backyard. There, he notices an old Japanese-style house hidden in the forest. Beside it, he sees the little boy from before. Kohaku interrupts him, though, asking what he's doing out in the forest. While Shiki knows this is Kohaku, for some reason, a different name comes to mind. Anyway, he inquires about the young boy, but she has no idea what he's talking about. Since Aki has been waiting for him to return, the two make their way back to the mansion proper. Looking behind, Shiki spots the boy still staring at him like a phantom. He spends a typical night with Akiha and the maids before making his way to school the next morning. Oddly enough, Arihiko's there early, and the two of them discuss graduation coming up for the third years in 2 months. Because of that, Arihiko assumes Shiki's come early to spend as much time with CL as possible. Just as she's mentioned, CL comes gleefully skipping through the hallway and into the classroom. Instantly, he remembers her, causing tears to form around his eyes. He wipes them away before he can really notice them. He doesn't recall anything worth crying over, but apparently she's been eagerly waiting for him to recover. After all, they were supposed to hang out with Arihiko in the city together before he collapsed. Stating it's rare for them to actually arrange such an outing, he should be more careful about his health. Arihiko says it's not such a big deal, since they're students and can hang out whenever they want. CL contradicts this easygoing attitude, reminding him that she's busy preparing to study abroad. She wants to become a baker and run a cake shop, so she needs to study under an expert for 3 years. She promises to come back, though, not wanting to leave her father alone for too long. Excuse me? Wasn't CL's dad killed when she was possessed by Roa? This realization starts to break apart the illusion Shiki's in. CL keeps rambling about her plans for the future, but Shiki tunes her out, confused by what's going on. He puts his hand to his chest, recalling that he should have a scar there, but in this reality, he doesn't. CL tries her best to preserve the pleasant illusion, but Shiki starts to poke holes in her logic. He asks her what kind of person her father is, even though the two of them should have already met when visiting her house. The students are gathering for homeroom, but as Shiki realizes the truth, everyone but CL begins to disappear. Seeing this, CL gently asks him if he's caught on. She did her very best to make this vision as pleasant as possible. Normally, people wouldn't realize the smaller details, and Shiki admits he should probably ignore them. It is a wonderful dream after all, but he just can't lie to himself. Nighttime falls upon the classroom, and CL confesses his honesty is a good thing, even if it's foiled her plan. She wanted to experience this a little longer, knowing reality would hurt, but she takes him to the tea ceremony room to properly explain their situation. Both Shiki and Roa died when he stabbed himself, turning CL's body back to normal. To thank Shiki for giving back her freedom, she decided to use the magecraft she learned from Roa to construct this illusion. In order to make this possible, CL is giving up her life to preserve his. He says he doesn't need such a thing, that she should go enjoy her own happiness. Obviously, she's wanted to become human again for so long, but asserts that now what she truly wants is for him to be happy. The illusion dissipates with a final flicker, returning Shiki to reality. After gazing up at the stars, he realizes his head is resting in Ciel's lap. His chest wound has been healed, and all traces of Roa are gone. He's human again. The girl cradling him is silent with her eyes closed. While her smile looks hopeful, Shiki understands that she's passed on, giving up her life to save his. Their shared illusion was delightful, but ultimately, this was her inevitable resolution. As memories of her gentle voice fill his mind, reality sets in bit by bit, purging him of his frail breath and tears. He told her not to go through with this, but he understands why she did. He would do anything for her happiness, just as she would do anything for his. In this case, she just had the final say. Regrets spill out, but he mostly thanks her for the life she's given him. She may be gone now, but he still has a life to live. This is where the credits roll, but before we hit up the epilogue, let's touch on some things going on in Shiki's dream world. You'd know this from the original Tsukihime, as it's revealed in the Far Side routes, but the boy Shiki's seeing is obviously himself from the past. He's not a Tono by blood, instead being adopted into the family after his own was murdered. His true name is Shiki Nanaya, and he was the son of demon hunters who actually fought against the Tonos. If it weren't for his first name being the same as Makihisa's son, he likely would have been killed along with his parents. Before the accident, Shiki lived in that small Japanese outhouse, and those residual memories seem to have manifested in the dream. As for Kohaku, he wanted to call her by a different name. While he's more in touch with his past, he seems to have realized that Kohaku isn't her actual name, or at least it wasn't when they were kids. It's a cool nod to the Far Side routes. Anyway, after the credits, we find out that a year and a half has passed. Shiki's been living in Ciel's apartment, but now it's time for him to set out on a new venture. Outside the complex, Mario's lackeys, Ando and Karius, are here to pick him up. Recalling past events, Shiki recounts how he took Ciel back to her apartment after she died. Some armed men came to collect her body, but stepped aside when Mario showed up. Despite her admirable service as a vampire hunter, the church wanted to possess each drop of her blood and bones as their own property. Normally, her corpse would be given to the burial agency, likely to be mistreated, but Mario promised that in his care, Ciel would be able to rest easy with her body preserved on his dollar. After that interaction, Shiki asked Mario to take him to the Vatican. While he didn't care for the church itself, he felt working under Mario would help him further his goal. Cardinal Laurentis was the only cardinal who could authorize access to the church's archives on research regarding resurrection and restoring of life. Karius warned Shiki that even if he could get access to those archives, they don't have anything as convenient as a sacrament that can save Ciel. Despite this warning, Shiki chose to enter into the Holy Church, even though it meant abandoning the Tono heritage. Akiha let him go, knowing she couldn't change his mind anyway, stating he'd only be a bother if he wasn't going to contribute to the family. When he told Dr. Araku, she said things would be boring without him, but if he's headed to Italy, she knows a lady who's a monster of a philanthropist that might be interested in his troubles. After convincing Mario to accept his request, Shiki insisted on first graduating high school. It was something Ciel wanted as her last wish. To honor that, Mario let him finish attending school, while training under Ando and Karius to learn about European languages and dead apostles. After 2 years of that, Mario will give Shiki both work and a place to stay, though they won't be meeting in person after that point. Mario estimated that Shiki would only live for another 10 years, so he needs to complete his goal by then. Mario then says he's complying because his brother owed Ciel a major debt, and the Laurentis family doesn't forget favors. It's implied, though, that Mario's just using that as an excuse to help Shiki. Before taking Shiki in the car with Ando, Karius asks him why he really wants to come with them. Is he looking to atone for being unable to save Ciel? With a smile, Shiki admits that he made a mistake that he can't correct. Ciel's dead, and he can't revive her. Theoretically, he accepts that fact, but if so, what does he hope to gain? The mistake Shiki's talking about was trying to kill Roa all by himself. He thought it was the best way to help Ciel, but now he realizes he should have waited for her to work things out together, even if it meant him going crazy from Roa's influence. While he can't make up for that mistake, he can live the rest of his life without regrets. Just as she gave her life to save him, he wants to spend his remaining life trying to save her, even if it means trying to accomplish the impossible. Pursuing a miracle like that is where his happiness truly lies. Karius can't say if this is a wise decision, but wishes him the best as they set off for the airport. Looking out the car window, Shiki watches the city he's chosen to leave. It's a huge step, but somehow he knows he'll be coming back someday. Where we'd normally see a segment of CL-sensei, we instead get Neko Arc lecturing to us about rainbows. Turns out, there's this thing called a moonbow, which is caused when moonlight is refracted through water droplets in the air. Obviously, this isn't an outright happy ending, but it does have a glimmer of hope. If you want a more definitive end, however, Neko Arc tells us to go back to when Arcawade was straddling us and make a different choice. So long as you made the right decisions up to that point, you'll then be given access to CL's true ending. Neko Arc then fires off into space like a rocket. I can safely say that CL's true ending is definitely meant to be the grand finale of this entire novel. It's so chaotic that I've decided to give it its own video, so I hope you look forward to that in my next and last installment. Before I go ahead and roll the credits, I want to give a special shout out to my $10 supporters. Video Gamer 75, Steven Elak, Otaku Mom, Jens Ballman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Free Brick, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Crod, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Nigel, Happy, Sakura-chan, Caitlin P, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!